Last time we talked about retiring the term HR. This time we're going to talk about middle managers. Now, maybe there's the initial challenge. If we're expecting middle managers to be here, we may be slightly mistaken, only on the basis that we seem to be putting a tremendous amount of pressure on, is it underprepared, undercooked, overcooked, overworked middle managers? Where are that group sitting today, Laura?
And I think that's the key word for me, Kieran, is the overworked, or certainly the perception or feeling of being overworked. And we have continued, this isn't a new phenomenon. We continue to expect people to lead, communicate, prioritize, manage performance, give feedback. But the reality continues to be is that most people were never actually taught how to do any of these things. And we surprisingly have we never taught people how to work properly problem. I was working recently with a really, really great group of middle managers. They were super capable, really bright, really experienced, technically really, really strong in their area. And we got into a conversation about performance management, which, as we all know, and certainly from my own experience, as soon as the term performance management is so much as referenced, people have the ick. The back is up. People don't want to know about it. But we weren't talking about the system. We were talking about the actual conversations. And people tend to get kind of hooked up on the systems, and that's what they focus on. But in talking about the conversations, one of these middle managers said really openly, I avoid these conversations unless I really absolutely have to. And it's not because they didn't care or because they weren't capable, but nobody had really shown them how to do it really, really well. And when we dug into it, it wasn't just performance conversations. It was prioritizing, giving feedback, running meetings, all the things that actually make work. And Kieran, you and I have spoken about this before, where we're certainly in my clients that often it can feel for me that it's very basic, the kind of skills and the kind of information that we share with people, and they lap it up. They want to know more about it. And it does come down to that, because those things that make work, we haven't been teaching people how to do. And it really struck me, we promote people, we expect a huge amount from them, but we rarely stop and said, have we equipped them with the fundamentals to do that really well? And it is that word, fundamentals. And often we can perceive that as, I suppose, the dirty part of work, right? It's not that people aren't capable, but it's we're expecting a capability from them that was never built. So when we talk about performance issues, engagement, or even leadership gaps, is the question what's wrong with people, or is it what have we never actually taught them?
Have we hired the wrong people? Like, go back a little bit here, because again, I worry that we're now having to mother or parent or father or a group of highly paid adults who should know these things, or should they?
Well, organizations don't teach these skills for that assumption. They assume adults already have those skills. So you're experienced, you've been promoted, you've been hired based off an amazing job description, an amazing capability framework or core skills. You should know how to do this. But the reality is that most people were never taught how to give feedback. They were never taught how to have difficult conversations, how to manage time reactively. And that can confuse activity with effectiveness. So we promote people into leadership roles and expect capabilities that were never really developed. So should they be developed, or are we hiring people on the assumption that that skill set is there without actually measuring or checking that it is?
Well, we've jumped in, so let's step back a little bit. What is a manager? If God forbid we have to go back to the very fundamentals, but what is a manager? What are we expecting to do? Because this middle management group have had a kicking for years. The best thing ever because we got the board, and then we got the front line, and we need someone to interpret it. The worst thing ever because they're getting in the way of the instruction and the actual real work. So draw back a little bit. What is a middle manager? What are we saying they're doing? And then what are we saying the skills they need are in 2026 to 2030? Because I'll talk about World Economic Forum and what I think they need, but let's draw back a little bit before we kick them any further.
Okay, well, I think, in a very, very simple version, when we look at what a manager is and defining what it is, a manager is or should be someone responsible for getting work done through other people.
So are we
It's
just
very
hiring
basic.
people? Are we, well, let's stay a little bit on that. So a manager today won't know all the things that their team knows. And therefore, when I take it from a digital and AI perspective, I have leaders all the time. I haven't got a clue what the word vibe coding means, what a prompt is. And therefore, if they're getting work done through their team, they're telling them what they should be doing in 2023, not 2026. And the second thing is the proposition that a manager's there, to mind a team, grow a team, develop a team, coach a team, remove obstacles, but not actually do the work themselves. Is that not something as well? Because that's maybe the confusing bit. Because do I know what it means to be a manager? In other words, what's expected of me? Maybe that's not clear here at all.
Yeah, but do I need to be told what that is and what the expectations are, or should I innately know that? And I think that's the argument that we are having and that we need to be having, because the assumptions are being made without those questions being asked. And we know that, like, if we look at research from Deloitte, you mentioned coaching and developing people is now one of the most critical capabilities of managers. It really affects performance. It directly affects, indeed, performance, engagement, and retention. So managers are no longer judged by just what they deliver, but it's how well their people perform and grow. So to your point there, that is part of the expectation, or the new or current definition of what a manager is. But are we telling people?
Well, go back to what you're saying there, because I've seen, and maybe this is slightly biased experience because I adore coaching. I'm a qualified executive coach. I made sure I was. When the rubber hits the road, it's, can you please stop coaching and just get more output? I see a lot of that. And we're talking about soft skills here, or what was traditionally called soft skills. Are we talking about still needing soft skills? Are we talking about operational skills? What are the skills that we think managers need today to allow them and their teams to be successful, and ultimately the organization?
Well, I think we need to reframe how we define those skills, because historically we've always referred to those type of skills as soft skills or core skills, and they've become, in a lot of particularly bigger organizations, what we would describe as like off-the-shelf training programs, where, aligned to a core skills program, we have, communication skills and delegating skills, and I select to attend one of those. I tick that box, and that's great. I now have that skill, but we're not actually measuring any of those skills. So in terms of the bigger picture and what matters to the organization, if we can't track those skills or we can't measure those skills, are they really important? So I think moving forward, when we're looking from, 2026 and beyond, the coaching piece and people development, that's one of the critical skills that we will need. The also basic skills around communication and difficult conversations. Difficult conversations are one of the biggest gaps, and they've been identified as one of the biggest gaps for managers. And if we're looking at, say, that concept that you mentioned at the start, the dirty world of work, the most basic leadership skill of all is conversation, and it's still the least developed. So that is a skill that we will require going into 2026 and beyond, but it's a skill that we need to think about how we are turning the dial on that skill. So instead of having those off-the-shelf training programs, we need to look at how we can embed that skill development into our day-to-day practices. And we know that people's, say, attention span has reduced significantly. So what are we doing to amend our interventions in order to get the most bang for our buck? And a lot of organizations are turning to bite-sized modules, whereby you're looking at on-the-job training for 60 to 90 minutes, or online bite-sized pieces of training that people can digest at a time that suits them. The other areas that we look at are the likes of decision making. And, we know that our middle managers they've been getting a kicking for years. They are drowning in meetings and reporting and admin. The McKinsey report that was released there recently shows that they spend up to, I think it was about 35 to 40% of their time on non-people related tasks. So it's not just like basic time management, it's deciding what actually matters and stopping the rest, and having the scope or being given the permission almost to stop doing the rest and focus on what actually matters. And it's something go on.
So let me challenge here. And again, that's my role.
How unlike you.
I know. That's my role in this podcast. You bring the brains, I bring the challenge and the awkwardness.
I don't know if we've got this balance right yet, Kieran.
Yeah, we have. So we mentioned a moment ago, we need to teach people communication skills. Really? You're telling me that I need to teach a manager to talk? And the second one was, we then need to assess it. Why the hell am I assessing this at all? I've given you the training. Go and do the training. If I have to tell you and check in that you're doing the training, it becomes very parent-child, whereas if I put the right individual in the first place who I hope can communicate effectively in some shape, form or other, I give them guidance and training, they should do it themselves without me having to check. And ultimately, you control whether you're in the meetings or not. Elon Musk says, if you're not adding value, just walk out. Then surely we need to take a lot more responsibility here for actually taking what we've learned and putting it into shape without HR having to go back and check that we've actually done it, because that now becomes parent-child. The second thing is, it's up to you to construct your own working week to make sure that you're actually delivering things that add value, not putting yourself into meetings and other routines that fill the week and feel comfortable, because that's called activity. It's not called, directed action or outcome based.
I love how you framed that, despite your challenging position. I love how you framed that, because you used, and I don't know if you noticed, you used the word should pretty regularly.
No, I don't even listen to me, so I'm not expecting anybody else to, so don't worry.
Okay, my antenna went up for the word should, because you did refer to that quite a lot. And yes, absolutely, they should be taught communication, because we know that it underpins performance, collaboration, trust, all that great stuff that we need to have. But yet the research still tells us that it's one of the top drivers of disengagements. So we know that managers who communicate will drive higher performance and retention. So if this, the standard answer is always going to be, of course, we need communication skills. Everything runs through conversation. We know that, but maybe the problem isn't communication. It could be the clarity, because you'll often hear things like, oh, we need better communication. But what we actually mean is maybe priorities are unclear, decisions are vague, expectations are inconsistent or haven't actually been made clear. So people communicate more, great, but nothing really improves. So more communication doesn't necessarily fix for poor thinking. So a lot of training focuses on, and I've delivered training on this myself, around tone, phrasing, and frameworks, more models, but avoids maybe saying the hard thing or being direct or making clear decisions. So we ultimately end up with polite conversations and a lack of clarity. And, it can be sometimes a courage gap. People don't have the courage to speak up. They should have, but they don't, and that, I think, is probably where AI is also, and I know we weren't going to maybe mention that, but AI is changing what good communication looks like as well, because AI can now, and we've all been on the receiving end, or we've all been on the attempted drafting. I love when you talk AI, because you lose me completely, but we've all attempted to use AI to draft emails or to structure feedback and suggest wording, and the value might shift to how well you can write or phrase, to how clearly you can think. And then the judgment piece that we mentioned last week, that then comes into play. So do we need communication skills? Yes, but not in the way we've traditionally taught them. It's not more polished, it's clearer thinking, okay, and better judgment.
Just to be clear, in defense of the AI club, everybody notices really poor communication when it comes to AI. Funny they don't call it out with people. And why I see some of that, what you might call AI slop communications, they're just doing it wrong. Because we have to remember, and this is a bit, not in defense of machines, because I adore people more than technology. 34% of us are emotionally intelligent. Notice I put me in that as well, just to get me in, but I put all my content through, my emails through an engine to make sure that I'm not upsetting anyone. And therefore, the AI is a chance, if we code it right and prompt it right and build it right, that will actually help all the things that you're actually describing, structure a message, make it simple, focus on the audience and everything else. So again, it's in there and helping, but it is extraordinary that we're having to explain to people how to communicate with each other. And remember, now we're in a multi-generational workplace as well, where you're mentioning, we need to verbally communicate. Well, actually we do and we don't. I think that's where communication falls down, is that we're taught a framework of how to communicate, but actually we're becoming robots then. We're becoming the AI in the human machine, because we're delivering it in a very standardized, formulaic way. Whereas the generation that's coming through to work actually don't talk to me. And it's not that I'm not communicating, it's just my communication style is different. It's called texting and it's called whatever. And it's different generations are going, why don't you just talk to me? And that generation's going, why do we have to have a meeting? Because I've told you everything you need to know in a WhatsApp, in a text message. So I challenge us with frameworks for a start. And that's why I worry. We go back to what we said last week. Do we need to change HR? What you're describing to me is that the fundamentals are still the same. We need to communicate. We need to organize people. We need to manage people. We need to be, we need. But somehow all of this is still not working. So if I push you a little bit and say, look, what are the skills? Because I hear about agility, flexibility, analytical thinking, data, AI literacy. I also think people should have basic financial literacy at a
Yeah,
at a
yeah.
senior level. But I also hear about systems thinkers, and I hear about self-awareness, and I hear about incredible curiosity, all these things that are going to help us survive. And all of a sudden I'm going, oh my God, even when I'm saying that, I'm thinking that's a lot in one beastie. And then you see a lot of organizations who, rather than using technology to allow great people to achieve more with more tech, more and better people, more and better outcomes, we're still making all the same fundamental mistakes that we've been making for years, and we're still not moving forward. And now what you can do, by the way, this is the great one, is now we're going to give you more autonomy. You can now do your own HR. You can now do your own procurement. You can now do your own finance. And you go, okay, so when I do all that, at what stage of the day can I do the work that I was actually employed to do? Let's imagine this technology or something. And now I need 20 skills because the World Economic Forum have decided what those look like. I'm exhausted. So how are we going to help people who are listening into this podcast go, oh my God, I feel this pain, and hopefully I'll listen to this on listen back because I'm too busy. So how do we actually train people, and how do we actually structure these roles or our businesses to allow managers to be really effective and to create organizations that work for everyone, particularly when we're talking about the change of pace, the change of agility that's required to meet multi-generational needs internally inside the business, but make sure we're actually delivering a product or service that someone wants to consume in a new and digital way, and communicate with them effectively to make sure the whole machine works itself.
Yeah, and it's
No
an
challenge
interesting.
there, by the way.
There's
You've got 3
about 20 questions there. You've got 3 minutes. Well, I love the generational topic, and I love to discuss ad nauseum
I thought I'd give you the bone. I thought, give her the bone.
I'm not going to go for it. I'm not going to go for it. I've got too much bashing over talking about the younger generation. So all of those elements that you've just mentioned, I could discuss ad nauseum. And I think, for coming from a training and learning and development background, the issue isn't just that we don't teach the skills. It's that, I think, currently looking at it, it's we continue to treat them as training topics. So we need better communication. You need to go into communication skills. We need better listening. You go into listening skills. We're continuing to treat them as training topics. So we haven't moved on for any generations in terms of moving away from that training topic approach and looking at it from a daily practice, and separating them from, I suppose, real work, because we're not actually embedding them in how the work actually happens. So if I come from the background where we had the soft skills, we had the core skills. I think we need to reframe how we actually define that skill set that we aspire to, and those skills that we want to identify in the future organization. So, more progressive organizations are reframing them as operating skills, i.e., how work actually gets done. So what I would encourage listeners to do is to think about what they're doing in defining standards for running the dreaded meetings. As basic as it sounds, it is looking at the standards for running meetings, look at the standards for giving feedback, and look at the standards for decision making, and build them into onboarding, build them into your promotion criteria, build them into your leadership expectations, and tell people about it. Define what good looks like for 3 of those things. A good meeting, a good feedback conversation, a good one-to-one, making it visible and making it expected. But again, it's the follow through and it's the embedding piece, Kieran, that's different to what organizations have traditionally been doing, is that we look for that movement in what people are doing, and we hold people account. You mentioned earlier that we're accountable for our own development, our own career. There is still that expectation of my organization telling me what to do and telling me what good looks like. And maybe we need to meet people in the middle here and make it visible, make it expected, but also hold people account. So replace training with practice loops or habits. We're moving away from workshops, and I'm doing myself out of work in saying this, but we need to move away from that workshop one-off training sessions. Often with clients that I work with, I will say, unless there's follow through or unless there's actually impact or value add here, I'm not going to engage in a tick the box exercise. We need to practice embedding into real work. And what that actually looks like, is weekly practice. Okay, give one piece of developmental feedback this week, run one meeting using a structured agenda, and reflect afterwards. What worked, what didn't work. I know it sounds basic, I know it sounds a little bit boring, but they are all practices that if we can embed them into our day-to-day interactions, they become the norm. They are the things that are going to move that dial and have that operational impact, not that one-off training workshop.
So who's going to do that though? Because at worst here, Laura, I'm hearing I need a tick box that says this is what a good meeting looks like. Then I'm going to go into a room. Then I'm going to assess you against those ticks to make sure you're doing it. And I know that's not what you're suggesting. So bring it to life for me, because someone's going to sit here and go, okay, I love that feedback, because I love feedback, mentorship, coaching. I absolutely adore it. Others are more defensive, and that could be just personal history. It could be the environment they're in. But bring it to life. I'm now turning our HR people into executive coaches who are going to sit with me and then feedback at the end of every meeting. Is that what we're saying?
I think in a real world that's not necessarily practical, but it's looking at moving. It's not saying HR is the process owner, it's saying HR is the capability builder. So if you think of HR as having that coaching mindset, but it's not, I suppose the key is making it real. And that's what you're, I suppose, alluding to there. But we're looking at a mindset shift. So we're advising people issues. We're moving from that to coaching leaders through them. So it's providing leaders with executive coaching opportunities and changing how HR shows up in conversation. So instead of us giving them the answers, drafting the responses, fixing the issues, providing them with that tick the box exercise, we want to move towards what outcomes are you trying to achieve? What conversations have you had so far? What's stopping you from addressing it directly? One thing I've seen organizations do, which I think works really well, is having people champions within the business. So instead of having your HR BP or your HR exec coach, you have people champions within the business that are provided with that support, guidance, and coaching that can then live that in the business, show the business what good looks like, and ask those more challenging questions. Giving a very simple coaching flow to them that wouldn't be like training heavy, but if we think of and you've probably heard the phrase, the coaching spine, where we're looking at clarifying the issue, creating ownership, and committing to action. Allow your people champion to have responsibility for that within the business, and stop HR doing the work for leaders, which we mentioned last week. We're looking at how we can build that capability within the business, opposed to providing the solutions from HR.
But do we have time? Do we have time? Because I say this, we've now got coaching champions, we've now got data champions, we've now got risk and governance champions, we've now got automation champions, we've now got, when am I getting to do my job? And by the way, folks, we want you to do all this in addition to your role. We're not carving out 20% so you can drive everyone else.
Most organizations will continue to struggle with, fix it yourself. It's just faster to say. Coaching or providing that kind of gentle guidance and input, it is slower today, but it will be faster in the long term. And the question then becomes, are we prepared to slow down now to build capability that reduces workload later? And I think that's a question that organizations will have to ask themselves, where they prioritize building that capability at that level to enable work to get done more effectively down the road. And some HR teams don't have that time because they haven't stopped doing the work that shouldn't sit with us anymore, as we discussed last week, that the elements that can be moved out of the HR remit, and where we can add that value via the coaching approach. HR may need to step in more directly, but coaching can still happen alongside alternative interventions or even traditional interventions. We don't have time not to coach, would be my line on it. We
But here
just
we're
haven't
going
made
back
that
to,
shift.
yeah, but here we're going back to, so now I'm sure HR professionals listening into this and going, when am I going to get to do coaching? When am I going to get to create? I think this is a fundamental problem with organizations today. Notice you and I haven't talked about taking anything out. And I am a massive fan, before we put anything more into business, to do something called strategic subtraction, which is we celebrate when we add more in, more AI champions, more business partners, more data champions, more. And all we're doing is layering and layering and layering onto an already exhausted workforce. Whereas this is the bit where I am a huge proponent of technology and the change management piece. So I think we need to redefine HR's role from administrators to, if you're going to expect me to coach, okay, well, how are you assessing me? How do we assess our managers? All that
Yeah.
needs to come into play. But I think you can use a lot of technology, and this isn't me removing the people. This is using brilliant technology to allow people to achieve more. So, for example, when I go into businesses, they all want the AI strategy. What I talk about is strategic subtraction, about what is we're going to take away. How do we free up another 7 hours a week? And everybody goes, you're never going to get a 7 hours. I can get you an easy 10. It's not a problem using technology. So, for example, as I'm coaching someone, I can get AI in real time or post event to give me an indication of how well I coached or didn't coach. I don't even need to do the coaching. Now, again, this is a very personal thing. I'm not recommending you put technology at it, but I can put an agentic AI into your hand, and that agentic AI agent can watch everything you're doing, can give you, feedback on every aspect of your role, and can provide that feedback as much or as often as you want. I can automate and digitize a whole load of roles to get those 7 hours a week. I can teach you basic behavioral things. For example, how to optimize your working week in your diary, when are your best times and most productive times, how not to switch tasks and whatever. So I'm a tremendous fan of doing that first before we start adding in champions here, champions there, champions the other. But notice, even by giving you the 7.5, 10 hours back a week, not a problem, folks. It then comes down to, the culture of the organization. Have we got a coaching culture? It then comes down to, well, how are we then going to assess our HR colleagues? How do we get our HR colleagues to learn how to coach and mentor in the first place? And then when it comes to, when you're talking about real life skills, well, coaching and mentorship is one thing, but how do I teach client centricity? How do I teach colleague centricity? How do I teach problem solvers? How do I teach people work ethic? Because let's be honest, you need a strong work ethic. And if you don't have it, I can't coach it into you. You either will or you won't. How do I teach emotional intelligence? How do I teach AI, data analytics, financial literacy? The things, I think, the Swiss Army knife manager that we're expecting to have in place
Love
today,
that.
plus run faster than ever before without taking something out, means that I've ran my engine oil out about 200 miles ago, kilometers if you're listening in from America, anywhere else, and now I want you to do more. So I think we need a more fundamental rethink of HR. I think we need a fundamental rethink of management and structures. I think we need a fundamental rethink of how we're judging success. Otherwise, we're tinkering at the edges still, regardless of tech or whatever else. We're still tinkering at the edges in an age where we're demanding more. And I don't mean the good more, which is achieve more with more and better tech and more and better coaching, more and better leadership. So I still don't think we're actually solving anything for anyone so far. We've just said, here's more, folks.
Well, I would challenge you on that, because I think when last week when we spoke about this and we talked about the idea of the traditional versus the future focused HR, and we did land on the space of AI removing admin, for example, from HR that we continue to do. That's certainly one space where AI is going to enable HR and is already enabling HR to free up time to focus on the value add, to focus on the coaching, to start building capability and step back. I do think that there is accountability here for HR, because we are still holding on to those elements. Despite the fact, or the potential fact, of AI removing those elements, we still have an innate need to hold on to those things. And we have a responsibility here to remove ourselves from ownership. And it's only HR that can remove that dependency. And if we're still fixing it, we're actually going to be that bottleneck. So I actually would disagree with you in that the space, we have provided space for AI to take on, writing feedback, managing everyday people issues, being escalation points for everything. We cannot keep doing all of that. We need to start building the capability, but we need to relinquish the control. So I think certainly a takeaway would be to question your position and question, are you holding on to those elements that really we need to relinquish control of? We can use AI to generate responses, but it can't replace judgment. So use AI where it makes sense, but we need to stop spending time on what should I do, summarize this policy. AI can give us the words, but we need the judgment. So I would say to our listeners is, are you continuing to hold on to elements of HR that is no longer a value add? It is no longer where you're building capability, and it is where AI or generative AI, whatever support is suitable in your position, can come in and take that away and free up your time to do what makes the difference. We can continue to use AI to do the same thing and do it faster. Well done, but nothing is going to change. If we can use AI to stop doing the wrong work altogether, everything is going to change. So I think that we are in a space where we need to educate ourselves as a HR population as to where AI can free us up, not where AI can keep doing the same work faster, because that is not going to bring any change. It's what can, I suppose, I just really, we're banging our heads against a brick wall in so many ways, because we know all of the things that we need to do. We know all of the things, spaces that we should be spending time on, and we will always revert to that. I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do that. We do have time to do it if we can use tools like AI to remove those functions that we should no longer be responsible for, and push responsibility back to the business for people leadership and support them in building capability.
Yeah, I think that comes down to the fundamental piece, isn't it? That, and again, I always sort of oscillate between this a little bit, and let me explain what I mean. I'm not a huge fan of making faster crap. In other words, you just put in to do the same old stuff. You've just done it a little bit faster. You can get home at night earlier, do whatever. Over the long term. Now, in the short term, to redesign what you're doing. So let's be honest, this is all going to take a little bit of time. I need to go away and learn how to coach and mentor. I need to redesign our onboarding programs. I need to spend time, not 20 hours doing admin, but I actually need to spend 20 hours working with management, my leadership team, coaching and mentoring those, all the better. And again, I should be using AI to record the calls, to write up the notes, or more importantly, let the manager write up their own notes, take their own commitments, because again, I'm not doing that for you.
Wow.
But in the long term, we need to redesign how we actually operate, and I think that is not just HR, I think it's finance, because I've heard the same thing coming from finance professionals, which is, look, we're going to give you more power, AKA we're going to shrink our team because we're under pressure centrally at the budget. And I'm going to say, yeah, we had 30 in finance. Now we've only got 15. But what they've done is taken the 15 people's roles or work and handed to a manager who now needs to do their own payment, their own budget, all the things that they, that is traditionally with a finance team. Now, I expect everybody to financial literacy when you're at a management level. But over the long term, I want an entire redesign of the operating system, because if we're expecting 2020 firms to deliver in 2026, then it isn't just the technology. It isn't just the functions and departments that operate within those companies, but we need different ways of actually being constructed. So for me, instead of your traditional HR business, which typically for many is people services, HR business partner, COE, I do want to use tech and AI as one tech to help people business problem solve, to make a business impact. And then that means fundamental reshaping of roles like service managers, problem solvers, product managers as the role of HR, because that's the series we're talking about at the moment, to allow the business to have the greatest impact, to free those individuals to have the biggest impact, to allow the organization to work in a way that it really needs to coming into 2026 and 2027. And if we don't start to take action now, all of a sudden, businesses, which I think tend to, unless it's heavy construction where you do need to invest over years, have roughly got 18-month strategic cycles. And therefore, it's going to take 18 months to get all of these, new roles in place, like your vibe growth,
Yeah.
market manager, your
There,
people, whatever.
you've used those terms again on me, the vibe
Those
coaches.
just get it done. Do you know what I mean?
And I'm jumping on that because, I think, if for listeners, is there potential here to remove the term manager entirely? Some organizations are moving towards, capability leads, because manager implies control, which we would have defined at the outset, not development.
Uh,
Is there, could our listeners today say, do you know what? Is there one thing that I could take away? What one thing could I take away from my managers this month?
Yeah, but this goes well. I love that subtraction piece, which is, look, how
Yeah.
can I take something out to free the time? Now, again, I think here, look, we need to use technology to free people up to do the stuff that really, really matters. I'm a huge fan of well-trained, well-capable managers. I do think people have been put into roles that they're not suited to. But again, it's up to us to career path people, not just land them in a role because they've been there 2 years and we can't think of anything else to do. We'll chuck them a bit of skill. We'll give them a bit of finance work. We call that increased responsibility and claim it as job enrichment when in fact it's job enlargement. But what are we going to send people away with today?
Okay.
Or what is those 2 or 3 things that they need to do?
Well, I like to think in threes. So for me, the 3 things would be, if the role is broken, stop training it. Stop sending your managers on courses instead of fixing the job you've designed. Okay.
Perfect.
Managers don't need more skills. We know that. They need less to do. Overload is the real performance issue, not capability. If AI can do it, managers shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, unless it's emotional. If it's recording meeting notes and doing all that type of stuff that AI is bred to do, then we can free up time to allow managers to achieve more.
We didn't design the manager role, but we've just kept adding to it.
Massively agree. So we take stuff out, we practice subtraction. Again, that may involve other teams taking things back, finance taking things back, procurement taking their own role back, HR taking, whatever. I know, radical here, to free them up.
People leaders managing people.
Let me try and summarize where we got to. So look, poor middle managers have a lot going on, probably far too much. Use the technology where it makes sense, but we need a fundamental redesign of roles, managers, and HR and the others to allow us to actually free people up to do the job that matters. I do think at some stage we probably need to sit down and ask the audience, what are the skills that you think you need in managerial roles, and how would you go about getting them? Managers who are people coaches, who are highly emotionally intelligent, who have a wide range of skills. They're the thing that's actually going to make the difference in an organization. And
that they want to be in that role.
And not feel they need to be because of promotion. And my one is this, and I've said this many a time before, and it'll seem odd as an absolute business technologist. I fundamentally position myself as that. Only like tech that works. I wish we prepared our managers. I wish we spent as much time talking about our managers. I wish we celebrated great management, great coaching, great leadership as much as we do technology. If only we invested a fifth of what we're putting in AI into creating great people to give them the skills that they need, then for me, managers are 10x multipliers. Some teams are more.
Yeah. Here.
Train one manager would be amazing. Give them the tools, the training, the capability, skills, whatever else they need and want and should have, and let them loose. And imagine then what your organization is going to be, because this is an age of AI. Not that AI is the age or the defining thing. It's an age where AI is getting a lot of attention. The skill and the tool capability that's being enabled by that is absolutely fantastic. But we're still talking about all the fundamentals. Great leaders make great teams who make great businesses. And that's the bit we need folks to concentrate on. Thank you very much for listening in. Next week, we'll cover off intergeneration, and we might use the word intergenerational conflict and then tear that apart ourselves as well. Laura, until next time.
Looking forward to seeing you next week. Thanks a million. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.